Welcome to Beverley Park Homes.
Thanks, David.
Smashing Andrew. Can I take you for a little
I'd
tour?
absolutely love to come and see the factory.
Show you around. We're welcoming Andrew Jenkinson with us today, expert in the industry, caravan historian, talks about the heritage of the industry and everything that goes with it. We've had a really good walk around the factory today, showing him round what we're all about and what we're trying to achieve, and we're just going to have an open discussion about the history of the industry and where we are today. Thank you for coming down, Andrew.
Well, it's my pleasure because, as daft as it sounds, I love going around holiday home factories and caravan factories. So, to me, it's like, well, it's just great to come and see how things work. And going around different organisations, you get shown different things and what have you. And I've been around some of the bigger manufacturers. But what I see here is that you've obviously got that commitment to the quality. You've expanded, but then you've not. But you've now sort of you're holding back because obviously the market for everybody is leveled out, which was going to always happen. You know, COVID was a nice little boost to everybody.
Yeah.
And this is what happens. I mean, the industry over all the years, probably I would say really from the late 60s onwards, has been a very up and down industry. So there's been a lot of peaks and troughs.
And that's one of the things I really wanted to come across in our chat today was it's a little bit like, I liken it to talk it, I don't mean this in anything.
No.
I used to go see my granddad and he'd say, Dave, don't worry, this stuff happens all the time. And sometimes it's nice for someone with a bit of experience who has been in 60s, 70s, 80s, seeing it evolve and seeing it ebb and flow, for just to say, look, this happens all the time, this is normal. Do you know, it isn't for me because I saw, you know, quietish times, really good times, and this is all new for me. So to have someone come in and just say, look, this is secular, this happens, it ebbs and flows, Dave, don't worry about it. There's a nice feeling to that.
Well, that's good because I think people have got to understand that, but there is still people in the industry who've been in it for a long time, and they're still sort of taken aback by it. They've overproduced because, you know, I always, you know, visiting people and they'll say, oh, we've done this, done that, and I'll say, yeah. But when it does level off, I said, you've got to sort of make sure that you've saved your pennies for the rainy days to get you through it, because what used to happen a lot, especially in the 70s, was I used to hear a lot of company directors were having a bit of a bean over time, nice cars, holding fantastic trade shows in nice posh hotels, organising coach trips. But when things tightened up, that had to be curtailed. That had to stop. I mean, we've seen a lot of big names around this area. Hull became the centre of caravan holiday home manufacture. And that really started from late 40s, a few manufacturers in the 50s, but it was the 60s as people left those established manufacturers because boom time was there. All of a sudden you had people who had paid holidays. They now could buy things on tick, as they called it. As we call it today, obviously finance. So people could buy a car. That meant that they could go out for the day, but they wanted to do more than that. They wanted to go for weekends and a week. And this is where this industry really kicked in, because a lot of people enjoyed a holiday home, whether it be at Bridlington or down in Devon, Wales.
Yeah.
It was inbuilt to people, and they then aspired to actually buying their own. They do hires. There'd be a lot of these sites that have massive hire fleets, and they would literally be rows and rows of hire fleets. And the idea was, and a lot of it happened, was that people would get hooked in on the hire fleet and then decide, do you know what, we could afford one of these. And, you know, all the relations could go. And in those days as well, you could do a lot of what you call subletting. I mean, a lot of parks have tightened up on that sort of thing now. But the industry's changed because people now expect more. 20 foot by 7'6" was seen as even a living van. You could live in that. And as the 50s went on, people started to want a bit more. So manufacturers went up to 10 wide, which by the sort of 60s was really classed as a very wide holiday home. So without giving you sort of really a history lesson, really, the 70s started off brilliant, and all the factories around in Hull, and there were some big names, people like A-Line, I mean, now long gone, Astral, and I mean, they were the biggest manufacturer in Hull.
So why Hull then?
Because
why
I think,
Hull?
one of the main things was timber to be brought in, also for exports, because the industry earned a lot of money for this country in exports. Overseas buyers would come at this time of year, well, September, and in those days, the shows used to be held at the factories, or even in a pub car park. And I always hear these stories from people who used to tell me, who used to go to these shows before they had the lawns and things where they brought it more together, was how they would go to somewhere and they'd have several drinks and then they'd go to the next factory. And, you know, I just don't know how they ever raised sober back in those days. Yeah. But they used to get a lot of overseas buyers, and it used to be reported in the press the following month after the trade shows how many hundreds of thousands of pounds of orders had been taken by certain companies, mainly to Holland. That was a major country that imported from the UK, and Belgium, and into Germany. But the amount of money generated saw some companies as well actually only produce for export markets.
Yeah.
They wouldn't produce for the UK.
Yeah, you've still got a few of them boys kicking about.
So there's probably a few that sort of came from that era, from the really mid to late 60s, because the demand from abroad for UK touring caravans, holiday homes product was phenomenal, because they could never really produce what we could make and produce for the money.
Because it seems strange. I mean, can you ever remember any targeted marketing campaigns from companies here for Holland or Belgium, or was it just a strength in the brand? And
it was a case that people just came from Holland, buyers came across, and there was a new manufacturer set up, which 90 times out of 100 there was always somebody new.
Yeah.
And it was usually somebody who had literally been with that company down the road, got a unit sometimes 100 yards away, and taken some of the ideas and started to produce their own.
Yeah.
And some of those companies maybe lasted only a couple of months.
Yeah.
It was a boss of the old ABI company, Terry Reid, who'd started Ace Caravans back in 1962-63. And his prediction was eventually there will be only a certain amount of manufacturers left. He predicted then, back in the sort of late 60s, very early 70s, that there was even though the market was very buoyant, the demand was there was still too many manufacturers.
Yeah.
Everyone tried their hand. Some of the product that was turned out was not the best. There was some good product, but because of the financial backing or whatever, they ran out of money and they folded. We look at people like Pemberton Group. Back in the late 50s, they were on an absolute roll. They bought Cresta Caravans of Hull, which was a newish manufacturer, started up in the late 50s. They bought a company near me called Dovedale Caravans. So they had 3 factories producing full pelt, because they used to supply a lot of the higher fleets. And they produced cheap holiday homes, which served a purpose, did well.
Yeah.
People liked them. They knew what they were getting. They stuck to well and tried tested layouts at the
Yeah,
time. But that market would eventually disappear. And I mean, they changed tack when they went into liquidation. They had to, everything was sold off, and they sort of went more for the up-end market, interestingly, in the early 80s. But there was a lot of manufacturers. There's a company called Silverline. They were made up at York, at Full Sutton, and they were big producers of holiday homes that they used to export again out to Holland, Germany, and they got the Queen's Award for exports.
Right.
And Astral Caravans, they were the same.
Yeah.
They got the Queen's Awards for exports too. But you see, you got a lot of people that left Astral and started up manufacturers as well. And interestingly, because you have that name Minster,
Yeah.
there's a company called Minster Caravans, which
Yeah.
was started up in 1969 by a guy called Craven Giplin. He was a sales guy for Astral Caravan Company. So he decided that, I want to speed to action.
Yeah.
So he moved into a factory on Victoria Road in Beverley. Now, I went looking for any set, but that's all gone. I would think where the Morrisons and all that is,
Yeah.
possibly may have been industrial units there at some stage. And he began making tourers and holiday homes as well in the same factory. And again, he had all these tourers with the doors are on the wrong side for the UK, because he sold most of his tourers for export.
Yeah.
And he just thought, well, what's the point of making it the way around? Because at that time, the UK, and Astral the same, the UK market would take a UK manufactured caravan with a door on what you call the wrong side. But, 79, 80 was bad years for the industry. I mean, 75 wasn't good. 73 when VAT was introduced
Oh, right, okay.
onto touring caravans and holiday homes, but only very little. It didn't affect holiday homes much at all. But the problem was the oil crisis.
Oh, right.
And all of a sudden, petrol went up really through the roof.
Right, okay.
I mean, believe it or not, in 1974, a gallon of petrol cost 31p. Now we think, well, 31p. But when it was only around about 20p, and it shot up to that, all of a sudden, things were getting really ridiculously expensive. And, of course, the materials to make caravans was expensive. A lot of the tourer people started to cut back. And interestingly, several went on to making holiday homes.
Well, you say there's a lot of history repeating itself there.
There's a lot,
with oil increases, or that basic product that you need to make it, or that goes into these price
energy.
increases. And we saw that massively over a couple of years ago now, 18 months ago, where price increases were coming in so fast. Before it was like you'll get a 6% in a couple of months or in September. Then it was you're getting 6% and it's coming on Monday, and we couldn't pass that cost on.
No.
That was agreed prices. That was just straight off our bottom line.
Yeah.
And but it is. I suppose it is good to hear that it has happened in the past.
Oh, I mean, the other problem was, of course, was that manufacturers then, some of the manufacturers actually tried to produce their caravans and holiday homes more cheaply. Now, some got away with it, but others, it really showed in the...
Yeah.
And those companies started to fall by the wayside fairly quick. 74... 75, they put VAT up to 25% on touring caravans, and it absolutely, the market flattened right out. The NCC went and lobbied Parliament. By 1976, that had dropped back down again to 15%.
Okay.
There was a lot of fields of unsold touring caravans, but as I say, the holiday home side of things hadn't been quite as badly hit, because obviously you didn't have to tow them. And the value of a holiday home looked very good compared to the price of a tourer, because tourer prices really had been always, they went up by £10 in a year.
Yeah.
of course, when VAT came on, the oil crisis came on. I can remember seeing the magazines. It would say prices increases for this month, pricing, and this was ongoing. I've got a lot of old Glasses Guide, and again, that's a good indicator how things were rising, how some dealers were suffering. There was a lot of dealers in the UK, but they started to really fall by the wayside. So by sort of the early, we had a little bit of an uplift by sort of 77, 78. A couple of new manufacturers came around, especially in the holiday home market. I mean, that sort of bounced back pretty well. I mean, I did a book on the story of the static caravan, and when I was researching that, and I went there and I thought, crikey, yeah, there was makes like Elizabethan, Atlantic. They were around, and Castle, they were around for maybe 2 or 3 years and gone. Ascot, gone. But all of a sudden they had a big slice of the market, or they were popular, and then they just sort of melted away and disappeared. What happened to these companies?
Do you think it's sort of, because I don't think a lot of them would have been bought out. Would it just be sort of financial mismanagement, or
A lot of it was probably financial. Again, they had a bit of a good time. We're going to get that nice new car. We're going to have a bit of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that goes. You've no money in the bank. You've no money for a rainy day to carry you through. Now, interestingly, I've got a YouTube channel, and I did. I was fascinated by caravan manufacturers' factories, whether they were still there today, even though the company had gone years and years ago. Now, where I come from, just outside of Blackpool, we had several manufacturers, and I mean, some were quite dubious in one respect. They would falter and then they would start up again, and there'd be a fire, and then that would stop, and then they'd start up again, and different names. But there was one near me called Summerdales, and they started up in the late 50s, literally in a small barn, producing holiday homes and a couple of tourers. Got a bit of an export business. Next thing, they built a brand new factory on a new industrial estate up at a place called Thornton, not far from me. Within a year or two, they'd expanded the factory yet again. I've got an old aerial shot of the new bit they'd added on. And I thought one day, I must go and see if that factory still stands. And I looked around and that factory was still there. It was clad and it was something now was different thing. But they had been on a roll for a good few years, and some of their designs were quite, how can I put it, were quite advanced. And they kept up with modern trends, but all of a sudden they just started to go down like that. So by sort of like about 66, 67, they got taken over by an investment company, and within 12 months the company had gone. And I put the feelers out on the local Facebook. I said, anybody work at Summerdales? And people, and I got people coming, oh, it used to be great, but they got the time and motion guys in, and this and that, and the quality started to slip, and and people were losing sales, and I love that little bit of history to find out what actually happened to that company. But as I say, I've looked around and say some of the ones round here. I mean, Grove Hill Industrial Estate had several manufacturers there. And I'm sure the factories are still there, but finding somebody who could say, look, yes, that was Beverly Coachcraft or whatever. I'd love to be able to go and sort of see if
and
that's
it's quite
maintained.
fluid on them industrial estates as well, especially in Beverley. I know my dad worked for ABI for 25 years plus.
Right. So how long? When did he start there then? When would he start there?
Oh, well, how old? He was there. He was working there when I was born, and I'm nearly 40. But he worked on a line for a little bit.
Right.
And I think one, because it wasn't always ABI, was it? Did it merge and become?
Right. So had he?
Beaumont.
Yeah. What happened was Ace Caravans, Terry Reid.
Yeah.
They started on, I think, Clough Road originally. Moved to Swinmore.
Yeah.
Because I think that was a new estate. Ace built a new factory there. Across the way, there was a company called Belmont that started up in '64 at Riverside Works somewhere. I think that was Hull. I'm not sure, it's top of my head. But they moved to Swinmoor. So you had Ace here, Belmont here. Belmont were just producing holiday home static caravans.
Right. Okay.
Ace producing mainly tours, but also by the late 60s started to produce static holiday caravans.
Right.
And they also produced a caravan, what we used to call a towable static. So it was 22 foot long, so basically a bit like a twin axle tourer today, but it would usually be on a single axle. It'd have a separate bedroom in, wrap round beach bench seat at the front. And that caravan was designed to be towed to a site and left there. And then if the people who had it got a bit fed up, they used to ring up a towing service, because they used to be scattered all around the country. And you'd say, you know, we've got a caravan at Skegness, but we now want to move it over to Bridlington. How much are you charged to do that? Can you do this? Yeah. And that's how it would happen. Those people then would probably say, when it came to change it, then they'd buy a proper static holiday caravan.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the twin axle tourer in the 80s really killed that market off. So everybody used to make a towable static caravan, usually along the line. But yeah, so Belmont were a very expanding company. Again, a lot for exports.
Yeah.
Ace were the same.
Yeah.
And they were literally, I think, a stone's throw from each other. They could see each other. And they were called, I think it was Adams that owned Belmont.
Right.
Terry Reid owned Ace, of course. And they decided to have a merger. And they called it Ace Belmont International, because when we were going around before and I told you about Caravans International, that was the biggest UK manufacturer. They were based in Suffolk. Right, okay. But they also were the biggest manufacturer of leisure vehicles on a global scale. Wow. So they had factories in Germany, Italy, France, Sweden, even in the States at one time, Australia and New Zealand and South Africa.
Because nobody's got anywhere near that since, have they? Manufacturer-wise.
The only people who've got there is now is from the country, people like Trigano, Erwin Heimer, who grew and basically, I think, stole a lot of the UK exporters market, really. But CI, as I say, they'd merged in 1963 with Bluebird Caravans, which was a very fast expanding manufacturing company, which had started before the war, and they used to call themselves Midlands, and they never really would brand some of their caravans. They were not particularly well made, but there was a market there, and they could sort of churn it out, and people, well, what is it? I've got a problem. Don't know where they're made. So no warranty problems.
Yeah.
But after the war, things changed. But the guy who started that, Bill Knott, he became a multimillionaire. By the late 50s, I mean, he owned a couple of caravan parks. He owned also Bournemouth or Poole Golf Club,
Right.
Because it's where Bluebird were based. And there's even a Pathé film, which I really say, go and have a look on the site, on Pathé site, and put in Bluebird Caravans. It's a very, very interesting and very amusing film now, but then it was sort of, it was fashionable. Bluebird got to such a state, they grew so big that they literally, and Sprite Caravans at Newmarket, which was a guy called Sam Alper, they merged. Bill Knott took a back seat, Sam Alper took over as chairman, and they called it Caravans International. From that happening, that company literally snowballed. They took over UK manufacturers, they took over 2 German manufacturers. In fact, the Germans were so scared at one stage in the mid-60s, they formed a bit of a club amongst themselves and said, look, if Caravans International come wanting to buy you, we don't sell. Right, we all agreed on that.
Yeah.
Right, we're all agreed on.
Yeah.
So they're basically protecting their own
Market.
market, which was still a fledgling market compared to what the UK was. But so CI was the big Bowie, but CI did have a lot of problems. They became a bit top heavy. And then the downturn came. They put a lot of money into their factory in Newmarket. They built a new factory in Germany in 1973. And with the downturn, all of a sudden, they had caravans and holiday homes full of fields full of them, and not a lot of money coming in. ABI, on the other hand, had bought a company up in Consett called Eldest Caravans, who were a good manufacturer that Terry Reid secretly admired and also despised because they competed with these Ace touring caravans.
Right, okay.
By that time, the Ace name was being expanded onto larger static caravans, but the Ace Belmont name went and they called it ABI. But they were sole importers at one stage for Zanussi products,
Right.
because they used to fit Zanussi cookers in the units. So ABI really started to steal a bit of the CI market, although Bluebird was a very strong brand in holiday homes and a bit on the residential side as well.
And that was still in the late 70s, would that be?
That would still be in the late 70s. But what did happen with CI is they decided in sort of 72, 73 that they would go to all their dealers and say, right, what we're going to do is we want you to go soulless. So you sell our 4 brands, which was Sprite, which is Swift now,
Yeah.
Ettles, Europa and Bluebird, Ferro. But you could sell a non competitor of ours, so a hand-built luxury caravan. Now, some of the dealers said, well, hang on, what do we get for this? Well, what you're going to get is you're going to get absolutely 100% customer satisfaction, because we will make sure every week that your dealership gets a delivery of parts. Whatever you want will be there in a week. They've set everything up on microfilm. Can you imagine that? Pre-computer days. And we will actually put money into any dealer events that you have. So, you know, if they had a bit of a show on,
Yeah,
it's a
they'll put
dealership or on a park, they would contribute some of the money into that, you see. So, of course, some of them took that, they bit the cherry and took it, but a lot of the others said, well, you know, we're not going to be dictated to. We still want to sell
Yeah,
ABI
what we want, yeah.
and what have you. Now, there was a large retailer by that time called Gailey. And Gailey had started off in the 30s, and by the late 50s, early 60s, they were starting to expand. And by the 70s, they had dealerships in Wales, several down south in the Midlands, up north. I mean, I went to one in Bishop Auckland, my parents, that would be about, 1972. It makes me sound really ancient, I suppose I am. And it was like it's like one of your factory units, and it was all laid out, the tours and accessories, and it was really like going to a show. And they turned around to say and said, well, we don't want to deal, we're not going to do it. We've got all these other manufacturers, they've supported us, we'll support them. The only problem was the Sprite touring range was the biggest selling range of touring caravans, not only in the UK, but probably in Holland as well. And Gailey said, we really got people hooked in when they came and bought a Sprite, and then they upgraded to something else. So it was a cheap van, and they needed somebody, they needed a van to get people in and then to upgrade on the next range of caravans. So they got into it. ABI had a bit of a powwow on this, and they came up with a caravan called the Monza, a touring range, and that was £25 dearer than what a Sprite was, but it looked more like £100 dearer, and it looked very stylish.
Yeah.
It looked really the business, and that started to eat into Sprite sales.
I think that was when my dad was at ABI.
On the
on
Monzas.
Yeah, the Monzla and stuff like
Because
that.
he'll remember a guy called Reg Dean. Reg Dean became a very prolific caravan designer.
Just going back to sort of names, I know I mentioned a few names today, but who really stands out as positively and negatively can be, but in a positive way, who could someone like me look to and think that's a really good example of how someone's conducted themselves?
Is that someone that's been and gone, or
they can be about today? Someone that
today?
I mean, I know that, I look at someone like Silvano, who's grown Home Secret
Prestige, and then
Prestige,
he's got
and did a brilliant exit, really well timed. And I've got a lot of time for Silvano. I think he's a really nice chap. And I think it is to be put on a pedestal. I know when I first started getting into this industry and talking to parks, one thing that stuck in my mind, and you get a little bit with this with John and his reputation as well, of people would say to me about Prestige. They wouldn't mention Prestige as a business, but they'd say, "I know Silvana. I'm good friends with Silv." It was, and I didn't know him at the time. I didn't know who he was, and I was, new to the industry. But the way that it was spoke about when he wasn't there was always quite impressive. And it's the same with John. We get that with our own John Wigglesworth, and he's the same. When people, it takes, like we were saying earlier on, years to build that.
it does
Years and years
yes,
and years of
yes,
hitting the
I
nail on
definitely
the head.
agree on that.
But is he someone that you can think from more the world that you're talking about, who's really stood the test of time, if you like, and always run the business ethically and things like that? Is there anyone that you can really think of name wise? Or are they all crooks and bandits?
No, I mean, there have been a lot of crooks and bandits. I mean, to be quite honest, the person that stands out in my mind is probably Peter Smith at Swift. I have a lot of time for Peter. One of the reasons is because he hasn't forgotten the history of this, the heritage of this industry.
It's a good word, I like that.
The heritage.
Yeah.
Because he knows where everything's come from. He knows how the struggles were. His father started up in 1964, so 2024 was their 60th year as a Swift brand. And as he said to me, he said, my dad worked in the factory, delivered caravans, cleaned the caravans. Basically, he did sold them, visited dealers, he did everything. And he said, in those days, it was different. And he said, and I got sort of lumbered into the shows. And he said, I can remember being sent to meet customers when it was the Earls Court show. He said, and I was only 14, 15. He said, you wouldn't do it now. But he said, my dad would say, right, go down to so-and-so, bring them in, and then bring them into the show. And he said, I can remember we used to use the line-out they used to use on the floors of the tourers then. And he said, in those days you could smoke in the exhibition places. And he said there'd be cigarette burns in the lino. He said, he said, Dad, I said, roll that up, back to the factory, that'll go in, we'll use that in the vans. These are great sort of tales, but I mean, Peter's dad died very suddenly after one of the Earls Court shows in the early 70s. And that left really Peter and his mum. And Peter was only young at the time, and all of a sudden he had the reins of that company.
Wow.
Now, Swift had grown, and they'd just moved to Dunswell Road from Hedden.
And what year was that in?
That was about 1972, 73.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Peter's got the full responsibility of it all. But what he did, he could have gone and said, you know what, we'll either shut it down or sell it, or we'll bring somebody else and I'm off. But he didn't. Peter took the bull by the horns, and he literally started to plough what he knew, what his dad would have done, into new, invested into the factory, designs. By the early 80s, when everybody else had had a bit of a cold, and Peter said himself, things were pretty tight. There were caravans. He said we were putting them in, getting a field somewhere and renting a field off somebody just to stick a few vans in, and he said it was touch and go. But he said some suppliers gave us some leeway. He says like everybody did, but he says we never forgot those suppliers and we stuck with them. But by the early 80s, things were changing on the market. Cars were getting, they're saying they're getting lighter. Caravans had to get lighter. But Peter invested into a lot of aerodynamics, and they got their own GRP factory. He bought land. When people said, "You buying? Hang on, the market's been in a real bad state. There's been so go there, and you're looking at land to expand." But by 1985, there was new factories put up. The demand was full on. Peter was there to meet it all.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of time for Peter because he knew that it was just going to be tours. When they started into the holiday homes, he surprised me because I thought he would literally gone and bought somebody like Carnaby or somebody like that, because Peter bought out quite a few of the competitors in the touring side of things, and he didn't. They started from scratch. Now they bought a guy in who had a lot of experience. I don't know if John may know him, and that was a guy called George Kemp. And George had started off as a cabinet maker at Ace Caravans in the 60s. And worked his way up till, in the end, he was high up in the business. And George had left with a guy called, gosh, his name escapes me now. Who started? And they went to start up a company called Coachman Caravans in 86, and both ex-ABI, and they went off to start up Coachman. Again, a bit of shaky start, but eventually got themselves a niche market, and have done very well since. But George retired, and Peter Smith brought him in to start up the holiday home side of things,
Right.
to get him on the go, because he knew he had so much experience.
Well, that's the key, I think, from my side with bringing in John, and even chatting to yourself today. I've only got so much experience with the industry.
Yeah.
You've just got to see it out and build it over time and keep that reputation there. But I think there's no substitute for it, is there? There's no substitute for that experience.
Unfortunately, you can't go to university and get it. And that just brings me on an interesting note. I was looking at the Swift stuff last year. They allowed me to go through and have a look at the holiday homes, the tourist side. And the young lad came across, because I've had a lot of changes there in marketing. There's a lot of what I call the old guard have gone. And this lad came up and he went, "Oh, I'm in marketing." And I went, "Oh, right, okay. These are such. This is such. You see." So he's telling me, and I said, "Oh, okay, that's good." He said, "I've not been long out of uni." And he said, "Just find my way around the industry, really." So I said, "What is it you do?" So I said, "Well, I do stuff for the magazines." I said, "And I've done a few books." "So what sort of books?" "The history of the industry." "All right. So what about Swift?" So I told him a little bit about it, and I said there was these other Astral and A-Line and all. And he went, "Do you know what?" he said. He said, "I've been talking to you now." He said, "I've just sort of learned a lot about that." He says, "You give me so much." I said, "Stacks and stacks of stuff." I said, "You could be here till you're at retirement age." I said, there's a whole lot of heritage behind this industry.
No, that's the
I
key
said,
word,
and there's how things have progressed, designs that were tried out that went by the wayside, but came back later on, and it's a new idea. Well, no, it wasn't, because actually so-and-so did it, and it flopped, and it was forgotten about.
And I think obviously we're going into something new for everybody in Harrogate.
Well, Harrogate is going to be an exciting show.
Yeah, and it's the first time the first year that we opened, we were at Cottingham Golf Club, and we had the best lodge that was ever made. And I ain't just saying that because it was mine, because it was. And that was our first taste of a show, but we were just weren't ready. We just took a...
So was that actually in 2016?
No, that was
or
17.
2017.
It was 17 by the time we
okay.
got there. And it was in September of 2017. And I just assumed that I'd build the best lodge and everyone would buy it, And we got there, and the lodge was amazing, but it was expensive because I'd gone really high end. And at that time, because it's just me here, So I'd put everything on the line, and I mean everything. And I had one lodge finished at the show, and then I had another one nearly finished at the end of the line, and another one in build. So I was 3 lodges in. I had no customers whatsoever. and it was John Morfitt that came and bought the first
Oh,
lodge.
yes,
And I know
yeah.
he's done that to quite a few other businesses in the past, so I tip my cap to that. And it just John came in and said, "Look, you're too expensive. You're far too expensive. The product's great there, but you're too expensive. If you want to sell, you need to be around this price." So we almost last minute changed what was on the line
Yeah.
and made it a little bit more competitive, and that made a big difference to us. And then we did a show. I think we did it was a Manchester show around the February time, or January, February.
Yes, I know that show very well.
Yeah, and that was it. After that, we stopped doing the shows. We didn't find them massively beneficial, and we weren't ready for the shows as well. And then obviously John came on board a few months ago with us, and it was like, no, we have to be at the Harrogate show. And at the time, we weren't members of the NCC. Not from no reason really. We just hadn't really got round to it, and it wasn't really pushed from our customers, so we didn't. But the way that this company looks now is far superior than it ever has been in its history, and it's growing nice and steadily. And it's the right time for us to go to Harrogate. It's the right time. We're full members of the NCC now. Obviously, John's on board with his contacts, and people are looking where he's gone.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, you've got a real kingpin there, actually, with John. I mean, I've seen John at the shows for years, and he's always had lots of people coming along, and
yeah,
to seek him out.
yeah. And we've just done a little. It's only, but it's through yours anyway. It's through Holiday. What's the proper word for the magazine?
Park Home and Holiday Living.
Yeah. So, but on there we've put David Hall and John Wigglesworth invited to, because his name should be on there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That there's an awful lot of, and John was one of these people, and you'll know what I mean by this. Who, if I know the park owner, he knows their dad.
Yes.
If I know someone, he knows their dad or granddad or somebody else, and he'll tell me that history of that family, and well, they bought this park in 80 something, or I remember when he was just a lad, and some of the park owners I know, John's got pictures of them sat on his knee as babies.
Yeah.
So it really does, and John's very much a yin to my yang in that respect.
Yes.
I'm full of enthusiasm and getting the product out, and with my background, I'm a lot more at home on the shop floor than I am going to parks. Whereas John's built his full friendship base around customers, and that's John's family, and you can see that by the respect that people give John when he goes on park.
The thing is, I think as well is when you do go to a park, and probably some people do it where they come and they go poaching for, basically they want some business, and as soon as they've got that business, they've gone.
Yeah.
But John's not like that. John's like, he wants to know how they're getting on, how they're doing now. There's a chappie I know that they had a very big family business, Tourer dealership and holiday home dealership and motorhome dealership. They covered the whole three, and that was the thing that people always used to. If I used to say, "Oh, I've dealt with," I'll mention it, Michael, I thought, "Oh yeah, Michael." He always knew what caravan we'd bought from him or what we'd done, and if we'd had a grandchild, he always knew, and people loved it. They loved it, and he was interested.
Yeah, it was genuine interest.
He was genuinely interested, and that's how his father built the business up. I mean, unfortunately, as these things happen again, sometimes some internal problems come along, and then the business was sold to a group called Discover, who really were car dealerships, and they brought quite a lot of different caravan dealerships, and unfortunately, a lot of them went by the wayside. Some very good established names as well, but Mantle still got his own dealership. And he does these sort of things like these tiny houses. You've seen these sort of towable square boxes, mainly from places like Turkey. And again, I'm thinking to myself, why buy in from Turkey when we've got sort of manufacturers like yourself who've got, you're here.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
it's a funny
you
thing
can be
to
2 hours
import.
on the road. He's only up the other side of T-Bay, and you can be there. And
Yeah.
any problems or anything he needs, you see.
Yeah, there must be. It's difficult to import this type of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Especially, and again, we were talking about new setups earlier on. The capital that it takes to set up a caravan manufacturer is not massive, but it that's the easy bit. Getting the benches in and the airlines in and the chop saws in and the jig benches made, that's the easy bit. It really bites after 18 months.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, you're over that first year and you've got a couple of bits out, and then you're into real business territory. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people that want to knock you down. There's a lot of people that want to see you fail in this industry.
I would definitely go along with you on that score. I think a new manufacturer becomes a little bit of a thorn in the side.
Yeah.
Go away. You
Yeah.
know, we've been doing this for a long time. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, you won't be around in 12 months, so why?
Yeah.
Why mess
why
about?
talk about? Yeah.
And I don't agree on that, but because I think everybody has to start from somewhere.
Exactly. You know. Yeah. everyone-
And you know, if you want to go to look at Willoughby, I mean, they were producing beehives when they started off and packing cases, and started producing caravans in 1949-50. And of course, again, that was a time when things were starting. The war had been and gone. People had a bit more leisure time. They were fed up of 5 years of war, and they wanted a holiday by the seaside. And of course, the caravan proved the ideal thing.
vehicle to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've got again big hire fleets and what have you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming to see us today, Andrew.
David, thank
Love
you.
showing you around and having a chat. It's been an education, and I do feel a little bit better after our chat as well. So,
smashing.
But thank you very much for coming down, and we hope to see you at the show. Come and see us there for a cup of tea, and you can see these beautiful homes sat where they should be.
Well, super stuff, and thanks for having me here. And to be quite honest, I think you've got a super product. It looks really good value, and I wish you all the more success.
Brilliant, much appreciated.
Super.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks a lot.